I think we shall not meet again, my little dove, my sweet Joanna. Goodbye, Joanna. You're gone and yet you're mine. I'm fine, Joanna. I'm fine. City on fire. City on fire.
Yes, I made that video. I watched this movie for the first time a year ago. It was the only time I watched it, and I immediately was so in tears about it that I went to look at edits on TikTok for the movie, and I found that there weren't so many, and I just wanted to make one to get it out of my system. So this movie, it is about a woman named Eloise who is, her sister has committed suicide, and she is basically left to inherit her sister's fate. So she is going to marry the man that her sister was going to get married to. And in order for this to happen, she needs her portrait painted, but she basically refuses to have her portrait painted. And Marianne is hired as a painter to kind of paint Eloise in secret. So Eloise is told that she's a companion for walks. And the setting is late 1700s in France. I would describe this movie as being deeply poetic. The director looked into the details, thought about everything so deeply, even to the point where she would take into account how many steps to take, how to breathe, how to pause between phrases, etc. And it really just adds to the musicality of the conversation in a film where the only music used is diegetic. And the story, it deals with themes of equality, social norms, remembrance, love, loss, womanhood, and the relationship between an artist and her subject. The story is told through a flashback, so it begins when an art student of Marianne's brings out a painting that she made of Eloise, and we start to get this flashback scene through a sound bridge. Ocean waves are going stronger and stronger, and then we're let into the world of this story. Firstly, I want to talk about the film director's decision between digital or film. So ultimately, the director decided to go with digital because they felt that the high resolution was necessary to capture all the details, the color of the painting, and for a movie that has to do with painting and art, they really wanted the colors to be vivid for the movie itself to really be like that work of art. Something that's central to the film and what I want to talk about first is the story of Orpheus and Eurydice. So you could kind of consider this film like a true a retelling or an expression of this myth, with Marianne representing Orpheus and Eloise representing Eurydice. I did some outside research on this and the parallels are even clearer. So Orpheus is known for playing music, being very musical, and Marianne is obviously a musical person. She's the one who shows Eloise a piece that is an orchestral piece, something that Eloise has never heard before. And this ultimately also leads them to fall in love and to learn more about each other. The shepherd Aristeus sees Eurydice's beauty and wants her for himself, so he makes a plan to kill Orpheus and take Eurydice. This to me represents the Milanese man that is going to marry Eloise. As they're running away from this man together, Eurydice then slips out of Orpheus's hands, and Orpheus sees that she has stepped on a venomous snake, and as she is dying, he can't save her. After Eurydice dies, Orpheus no longer enjoys playing music, and he decides to go to the underworld to try and get Eurydice back. He plays a song, they let him in, and Hades makes this plan with him that he can have his wife back if he doesn't look behind him as Eurydice walks behind him as he goes back up to the living world. And the myth goes that Hades tells him the second your wife sees the light, you can turn around. The thing is that in this myth, Orpheus sees the light himself, he turns around, and his wife is still in darkness, and tragically she is pulled back down to die a second death. and he cannot go down there again because that would mean his own death. There's a scene where Marianne and Eloise are telling each other about these little idiosyncrasies, mannerisms that they've noticed in each other, and it definitely is a moment where they can see each other more as equals instead of as the artist holding the power. As the observer, it's very clear that it goes both ways. The artist and the subject are both observing each other. And there's this line in this scene where Eloise says, "If you look at me, who do I look at?" Really sweet line, but it also brings us back to that myth. You're looking at me, I'm looking at you. Like, we both kind of made this choice.
Peut-être que s'il se retourne, c'est qu'il fait un choix. Quel choix? Il choisit le souvenir de Edith. C'est pour ça qu'il se retourne. Il ne fait pas le choix de l'amoureux, il fait le choix du poète. Elle lui adresse un adieu suprême, qui déjà ne peut qu'à peine parvenir jusqu'à ses oreilles, et elle retombe à l'abîme d'où elle sortait. Peut-être que c'est elle qui lui a dit « Retourne-toi ».
I love this moment because it kind of also shows that Eloise is going to be the one who leads Marianne to make the poet's choice, to turn around. As Eloise comes to this interpretation, it's clear that Marianne agrees with her interpretation, and unfortunately, or fortunately, however you want to look at it, that's the decision that she makes. Before we move on, I just want to touch on the previous scene where they discuss their idiosyncrasies. Really important in this film is the relationship between the artist and their subject. So what they explore here is what is the power of the person who is doing the observing and who is observing who. This scene is kind of where the power shifts, and why it ends the way it does, why Marianne suddenly wants Eloise to call off the wedding, whereas before she was feeling really guilty about having to paint this portrait, and she was just kind of trying to tell Eloise, oh, it won't be all bad, like, you'll listen to music, you will have some independence in Italy. And now that the power has shifted, it's clear that they're kind of on a more equal ground, and Eloise does hold more power than it appeared before when she really does make the decision. This power dynamic is really emphasized by the framing of the shots in this scene. So at the beginning of the scene, we see a close-up of Marianne's face, and we see more of like the mid shot of Eloise. And then as the power shifts, we see a close-up shot of the two of them that's kind of zooming inwards. And then finally in the end, we get that close-up shot of Eloise, and an even farther shot than Eloise even had in the beginning, just like a full body shot of Marianne. Here it's clear that Marianne is the one who's actually more powerless in this situation. And Eloise, as the model, is the one who is watching. We can finally see Marianne's fragility as the artist, the vulnerability in her work. And it also just emphasizes that an artist cannot really paint, cannot really do her work here without a muse. There are two moments when Marianne imagines Eloise in her wedding gown, and the first moment, she sees this and then she turns around to go to Eloise. The color in the gown, I would also like to note, it's so cool toned opposed to the warm tone surrounding. It's clear that they use cold imagery when reminding of the future, warm imagery when they're really grounded in the present. She's choosing the poet's choice to really just turn around, to really just look for one last second. When the portrait is finished and Marianne leaves,
Retourne-toi.
When I first watched this movie, I thought that this scene was much longer than it was because it just really was so impactful to me. It really just sunk into my soul. Yet what's crazy about it is that it actually happened so quickly, but they really build up to the impact of this moment so much that it felt like it was just an explosion. But rewatching it, I realized that it was actually really quick. At the end, when Marianne is describing the last time that she saw Eloise, and she is standing by her portrait of Orpheus and Eurydice, of course, she's wearing the same color that the Orpheus is in the painting, which is totally symbolic. And there's a critic that says this Orpheus is excellent. Usually he's portrayed before he turns or after, as Eurydice dies. Because to me, this really signifies that their whole relationship together was the poet's choice, meaning that they knew that their time was fleeting and they chose to kind of savor that moment of turning around, just looking at each other, just really getting to know each other before they would have to leave. The colors in this film are absolutely significant. So Marianne wears a red dress, and Eloise, when the movie begins, is wearing a blue dress just like her mother. But as the movie goes on, she starts to be wearing this green dress more often, which is the dress that she's wearing to have her portrait painted. And green and red are complementary colors, so it kind of just shows that their relationship with each other is so just, they complement each other so much more once they take the time to get to know each other. It brings it back to earlier when they were speaking about how their relationship was going to be ending, and Eloise says, "Don't regret, remember." At the end, when Marianne and Eloise are watching as the Vivaldi song is performed, and that was their kind of connecting song, we get to see, as the viewer, zooming in on Eloise, seeing her emotions completely overtake her. She finally gets to hear how the song ends. She gets to see how it is sad and it is lively, and then the song ends and the movie ends, and this is all that we get to see, because this is all that Marianne really gets to see, and this is because ultimately she turned around. We don't know. This film also deals with the idea of loneliness, solitude, and freedom, how these things are interconnected, and if they are necessary to exist together, or if they can be separate. There's this scene, there's this shot, and there's such a great level of balance in this shot. It's kind of unlike anything else in the film. It feels like a painting, honestly, which is not unlike anything else in this film. But I think the way it's shot, it just feels like you're really getting to look inside the lives of these women working side by side on their own little things, helping one another, making art together, smiling, and it's quiet, yet there's so much that is said that is just unspoken, that is like hinted at. This is freedom, and it is not lonely. And another scene that parallels the very start of this scene that really just kind of had shown the strength of their womanhood together. Now Sophie's embroidering, but the flowers have wilted, and the pan over, it's kind of like she's almost done embroidering, and it just also is symbolic of their relationship, all the three of them, ending as Eloise goes to get married and ultimately fulfill the social norm that they had all been kind of, when they had all been not really following social norms throughout that whole time. I'd also like to talk about the character of Sophie, who she gets an abortion during this time, and this also explores the idea of being free. There's that phrase that we're brought into this world alone and we die alone, but it's very clear that this is not true. It's kind of bittersweet to see that Sophie is getting this abortion, especially in the scene where she's getting the abortion and there's a baby right next to her, and the baby is just so innocent, and she's it's a very bittersweet expression that she has. It's just not true that we're born into this world alone and we die alone. Eloise and Marianne help Sophie to get her abortion, and Ultimately, these three women are doing taboo things. Sophie's getting an abortion. Marianne is a painter who is very independent, and she sometimes paints things that are not typically allowed, women are not typically allowed to paint. And Eloise and Marianne, obviously their romance is taboo as well, and their desire to not be married. When they decide to paint this scene of the abortion, they kind of celebrate their rebellion of the social norms. They're deliberately opposing the system, and there is some irony in this, in that Marianne and Eloise are unable to carry out their own wish, unable to really go against the system as they really had wanted. Meanwhile, they help Sophie to do what she needs to do. Marianne's first portrait was done according to the rules, but it lacked life, as Eloise said. When she paints this abortion, she just paints reality, and this is a clear shift that is happening for Marianne as an artist. Another important aspect is how art helps us to remember people, how people can live through art. So they remember each other through the art that they have of each other. When Marianne sees that final painting of Eloise, and she sees that she has her finger inside the book page number 28, which is where Marianne made a self-portrait of herself for Eloise to keep. The Vivaldi song that Marianne shares with Eloise finally gets to hear the rest of the song. She gets to experience the rest of her life. Something that's unique about this movie is that all the music in it is diegetic, so that means that all the music is happening that we hear is music that's actually happening within the movie. There is no music, like a soundtrack to the movie. One of the songs that the three women are listening to together, the lyrics "Fuggire non possum" means "they come fly" in Latin, an adaptation of the sentence by Nietzsche that says, "The higher we soar, the smaller we appear to those who cannot fly." And this completely relates to the power that these women held as they defied society in this moment in time, and the power that true connection, love, expression, and equality can have. An important visual motif in this movie is fire. So the original portrait that the former painter had started catches on fire, and the painting burns from the heart as it is destroyed. So as she falls in love, it's like she kind of destroys this detached style of painting, of not really getting to know people beyond that. And it also is burning in the heart, so as the heart of the painting is on fire, so grows Marianne's heart. A very important scene involving fire is the scene where they're singing "Fuggire non possum," and during this scene we can see that Marianne and Eloise are looking at each other across this big fire, and when we look at Eloise we can see the flames clearly around her, which is another way of representing how she is kind of with Hades, and Marianne is on the other side. As she walks away from the fire, we can see that her dress catches on fire, and she's completely unalarmed. It seems to me like the scene kind of where Eurydice gets bitten by the snake, and in this moment the music stops for a second, which reminds me of how Orpheus couldn't enjoy music anymore once Eurydice was gone. The transition here from Marianne helping Eloise up to them running by the water, holding hands, it's kind of like the fantasy of what could happen if Marianne could save Eloise. Overall, this movie is about the power of remembering, how we live through art, the impact of connection, and what it really means to be independent. In the end, they choose to remember, not to regret.